Welcome to the very first episode of Murder on Record. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we'll be diving deep into real case files, unpacking the facts, exposing the twists, and giving you a true crime story worth telling.
Absolutely. We're aiming to get right into the source materials, the evidence, the testimonies.
And to kick things off, we're starting in Arizona, where our first chilling case begins. You're hearing a 911 call from a woman who just killed her husband. She says it was self-defense. The jury called it cold-blooded murder. But what happened in those 3 hours, and why did she poison him first?
It's a really deeply disturbing case we're looking into today.
Oh,
Wendi and Joe Andriano, Arizona, October 2000.
right. So we've got Wendi, who was 30 at the time, and her husband, Joe, who was terminally ill.
Yeah, and the sequence of events that night, well, it led to Joe's really brutal death. And ultimately, Wendi was convicted of premeditated murder.
And received a death sentence, which is quite rare for a female defendant, isn't it?
It is, statistically speaking. It adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing.
Definitely. So it's the kind of case that just immediately makes you ask questions, right? A wife says self-defense against her sick husband, but the outcome is the ultimate penalty.
Precisely. So today we want to unpack the details, look at the evidence we have access to, the different stories, and try to understand what the records actually tell us about those really critical hours.
Let's start with the timeline then, because that seems, well, pretty crucial here.
It really is. It takes its first unsettling turn very early on October 8th. Around 2:30 in the morning, Wendi Andriano makes a 911 call.
Okay.
And according to the call records and reports, she told the dispatcher that her husband was dying of cancer.
Right, which was true. He was ill.
He was. But then when the paramedics arrived, she turned them away. Said there was a do not resuscitate order, a DNR.
A DNR. Okay, so for anyone listening, that's a legal directive, usually for terminally ill patients, telling medical staff not to perform CPR or other life-saving measures if their heart stops or they stop breathing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But using it to turn away paramedics you just called. It struck investigators as, well, odd, one of the first kind of red flags.
Yeah, it does seem strange. Call 911, then say, never mind.
Okay, but the strangeness didn't stop there, did it?
Not at all. Just over an hour later, 3:39 a.m., Wendi calls 911 again.
A second call.
A second call. But this time, the story she tells is completely different. Now she's saying Joe attacked her.
Attacked her? The man she just said was dying of cancer and had a DNR.
That's the claim. And when paramedics got there the second time, they weren't turned away.
What did they find?
They found a truly horrific scene. Joe Andriano, who we know was already frail from chemotherapy, he had suffered 23 skull fractures.
23?
23, and a deep stab wound to his neck. The level of violence was extreme.
That paints a very, very stark picture. So what happened in the hours leading up to that? I mean, the evening before, October 7th, things seemed almost normal.
Relatively, yes. The Andrianos actually hosted a barbecue at their house that evening.
Okay. Were there witnesses? Yes. And people who were there noted that Joe, well, you could tell he was physically weak from the chemo. He seemed coherent, lucid, interacting normally.
Which really clashes with the picture Wendi painted later of this violent attacker just hours later.
Completely. So the big question is, what happened between that barbecue and the chaos of the early morning calls?
And there's a really disturbing element that comes in here, right? The poisoning allegation.
Yes. That's a central and very troubling piece. The allegation is that Wendi poisoned Joe sometime that night with sodium azide.
Sodium azide. Remind us what that is.
It's a chemical compound. You find it commonly in pesticides, also in things like car airbags, actually. But it's highly toxic.
And they found it?
Well, crucially, they found sodium azide in their storage unit. But even more significantly, toxicology tests found it in Joe's system after his death.
How does it work? What does it do?
It basically messes with the body's ability to use oxygen on a cellular level. It can be lethal, causing respiratory distress, heart issues. It's nasty stuff. Its presence just raises immediate, serious questions about Wendi's intentions that night.
So you have this background, the illness, the barbecue, then these 2 calls, the horrific injuries, and this underlying poison.
Right, and this is where the narratives just completely diverge. Wendi's version versus the prosecution's.
Let's hear Wendi's side first. What did she claim happened?
During her trial in 2004, and she testified for, I believe, 9 days, she painted a picture of years of abuse by Joe.
Okay. Abuse claims.
Yes. And she claimed that on that night, it culminated in a final violent confrontation where Joe attacked her. And then somehow in this struggle, She claimed Joe slit his own throat.
Slit his own throat with 23 skull fractures already inflicted.
That was her testimony. Given the sheer extent of his other injuries, particularly the head trauma, that claim seemed incredibly difficult to square with the physical evidence.
I'd imagine. What did the prosecution say?
The prosecution argued it wasn't self-defense at all. They called it premeditated, cold-blooded murder.
And the motive?
Financial gain. Plain and simple. They pointed to a substantial life insurance policy on Joe, about $500,000.
$500,000.
Yep. And also, they were anticipating a payout from a malpractice lawsuit they had filed related to his cancer treatment. So potentially quite a bit of money coming her way if Joe died.
Okay, so a clear financial motive presented by the prosecution. How did the forensic evidence stack up against Wendy's self-defense claim?
Well, it seemed to pretty strongly contradict her story. First, obviously, there's the sodium azide.
Right. You don't typically poison someone you're about to have a life or death struggle with. It doesn't make sense.
It really doesn't. What purpose would it serve in a sudden self-defense scenario? It suggests planning.
What else did forensics show?
Then you have the blood spatter analysis. Looking at the patterns of blood stains at the scene.
What can that tell you?
It can reveal a lot about positioning, movement, the type of force used. In this case, the analysis indicated Joe was prone, essentially lying down for at least part of the attack.
Lying down. Not exactly consistent with him being the aggressor in a standing fight.
Not at all. It suggests he was attacked while already incapacitated or on the ground. And furthermore, investigators found defensive wounds on Joe's hands.
Defensive wounds, meaning?
Meaning wounds consistent with trying to block blows or ward off an attacker, like cuts or bruises you'd get trying to shield your head or face, or grabbing at a weapon.
So evidence suggesting he was the one being attacked and trying to defend himself?
Exactly. Which directly contradicts the idea that he was the aggressor or that he inflicted his own neck wound.
Okay, so the physical evidence at the scene, poison, blood spatter, defensive wounds, it all seems to point away from her story. Was there anything else? What about, like, staging?
Yes, that was noted too. Phoenix detectives who processed the scene felt some things looked staged. Specifically, a knife and a belt found near Joe's body.
What was wrong with them?
They appeared to have been placed there after Joe had died. The key thing was they were notably clean, lacking significant blood on them, which you wouldn't expect if they'd been used in that incredibly violent struggle Wendi described.
Suggesting an attempt to maybe plant evidence to support the self-defense narrative after the fact?
That's certainly what the investigators suspected, yes.
Yeah.
An attempt to create a misleading picture.
And Wendy's actions after Joe's death, did they raise flags?
They did? Our sources indicate she apparently changed her clothes before the police arrived for the second call.
Changed clothes?
Yes. And there were also allegations or information suggesting she sought help from a coworker to hide or dispose of evidence.
Again, not typically what you'd expect from someone who just defended themselves legitimately and is waiting for the police.
Generally, no. Cooperating fully is usually the pattern in clear self-defense cases. These actions suggested concealment.
And there was testimony from family, too, wasn't there?
Yes, quite impactful testimony. Wendy's own adoptive father reportedly told police something very damning. He said, and I'm quoting the essence here, "I remember Wendi telling me that she stabbed Joe."
She told her father she stabbed Joe?
That's what he reported. A direct admission told to a family member, which obviously significantly undermines her later claims in court about Joe slitting his own throat.
Okay, so let's recap. Financial motive seems plausible. Physical evidence, poison, blood spatter, defensive wounds. Staging contradicts her self-defense story. Her actions afterwards seem suspicious. And a potential admission to her father. It paints a pretty strong picture for the prosecution.
It does. It built a compelling case for premeditated murder.
But what about her claims of years of abuse? That's often a crucial factor in cases like this.
It is, and it's a really difficult aspect. Our sources do mention, though, a lack of corroborating evidence, specifically medical documentation, for these alleged years of abuse.
So no hospital records, doctors' reports of injuries consistent with abuse.
Apparently not presented or found during the investigation or trial, based on what we've reviewed. Now, absence of evidence isn't absolute proof it didn't happen, of course. Abuse doesn't always leave records.
True. It's notoriously underreported and hard to document.
Exactly. But in a legal setting, especially when claiming self-defense against such extreme violence, the lack of any independent corroboration makes the claim harder to substantiate, especially when weighed against all the physical evidence pointing the other way. It really highlights the burden of proof.
And it leaves that question hanging. Even if there was abuse, does it explain or justify this level of violence, especially combined with the poisoning?
That's the core dilemma, isn't it? And the poisoning, the sodium azide. It just keeps nagging. Why?
Right. If the plan was always the blunt force trauma and the stabbing, why poison him first? Was it to make sure he couldn't fight back at all, to weaken him?
That's a strong possibility. Perhaps it was intended to incapacitate him, make the subsequent physical attack easier, or ensure it succeeded. Or maybe the poisoning was the initial plan and something went wrong or it didn't work fast enough, leading to the physical violence.
Or maybe the physical violence was always part of it, to try and mask the poisoning or create the self-defense scenario.
These are the unanswered questions that make the case so complex and, frankly, chilling. The combination of methods, the timeline, it suggests a level of planning, but the exact why of the poison remains somewhat ambiguous, even if the intent seems clear.
It's just a really heavy case all around. You have this terminally ill man killed in such a brutal way. His wife claims self-defense, but there's poison involved. There's evidence of staging, a clear financial motive.
And it all culminates in that rare death sentence for her. It touches on so many difficult themes: caregiver stress or culpability, the use of domestic abuse as a defense, how the justice system weighs conflicting evidence, even potential gender biases, though complex, in sentencing.
Absolutely. It forces you, as you look at the evidence presented, to really grapple with what happened behind closed doors that night. How do you reconcile Wendy's claims with the stark physical realities found by the investigators?
It's a tough reconciliation. The jury obviously sided heavily with the physical evidence and the prosecution's narrative, and appellate courts later upheld that conviction and sentence.
A truly disturbing case to start with. It leaves you with a lot to think about regarding evidence, motive, and the finality of the justice system.
Definitely. The details are stark and the questions linger.
Until next time, stay curious and keep your eyes on the evidence.